And we're live. Welcome to another NPM Open RFC call. I am just pasting the agenda, the HackMD agenda in chat. Feel free to add yourselves to the attendee list. And we'll be following that. Today is Wednesday, May 27th. And again, thanks for all joining. I apologize we're getting a couple minutes late, started late. Quick reminder that these calls and all the NPM RFC communications are all done under a code of conduct, which can be found in the npm/RFCs repo itself. And we just ask that everybody is kind and that you raise your hand as is usual when asking to talk or talking on one of the discussions. The intention of these calls obviously is to try to push forward and to bubble up conversations about the work in progress and hopefully create another channel for the community to engage with us, the NPM team. And before we jump into the agenda, was there any announcements that anybody had? If not, but maybe we can do a quick round of introductions. I know a couple of folks are jumping on for their first time. Maybe Ed, did you want to say hi and say what you do?
Sure. Hi, everybody. I know some of you, not all of you. I regret that it's only some and not all. My name is Edward Thompson. I'm post the NPM acquisition. I'm doing product management for NPM. I'm coming from GitHub Actions, moving on to NPM. So very excited to see y'all.
And also, Zbigniew? Is that how you pronounce it? I apologize.
Yeah, I don't make English people try to pronounce it. Just use the first two letters. It's ZB. I've been using that with English-speaking people for the last 7-8 years. So it works. I react to it.
Good to know.
And you might know me as Nauctor from the internet. And I'm the guy who wrote NPM Audit Resolver and hope to talk about it today a bit.
Awesome. I think you and Roy have spoke earlier in the week, so that's great.
Yeah, and
awesome.
Something like 2 years ago or a bit more, I spoke about it with Adam Baldwin as well. So some of the inputs were coming from him, and then it evolved a bit. I'll get to it.
Cool. Orta, did you want to do a quick intro? I know you've been on the call before, but you could just say hi.
Hey everyone, I'm Orta the Rux. I work on the TypeScript team at Microsoft. Been plugging away on the Open RFC for adding type support into the registry. So I'm here pushing the forwards a tiny bit, asking questions, and just giving any useful feedback.
Cool. And Tierney, I'm not sure if you've done an intro in a while, so.
Yeah, I'm Tierney Siren. I work at Microsoft as a senior cloud developer advocate. I spend almost all of my time on Node and Electron and OpenJS, and hopefully more on NPM soon. So.
Awesome. And I know that we have a couple of regular faces, Jordan and Wes. Feel free to just say hi, or if you want to give a quick intro.
Hi, I'm Jordan. I'm on TC39. I have a bunch of packages and have a lot of feelings about NPM. So I like to help out.
That's the
you
best
have feelings, Jordan? Never would have guessed.
Cool. And Wes,
just come every week. So I've introduced myself a few times. Work at Netflix, do a bunch of Node stuff. So
awesome. And then Roy, myself, and Isaac are reoccurring faces here, I think. So awesome. So I apologize for a little bit longer intros, but want to make sure everybody gets a chance to say hi. And yeah, so quickly, if you haven't, feel free to add yourselves to the attendees list again on the HackMD doc, which I'll spam again as well. Yeah, we're just going to dive into it. Actually, before that, is there any item that should be changed or added to this? I know Roy had a chance to modify this, but if there's something on here that folks want to talk about that isn't listed already, let me know. But we'll dive right into the first item, which is PR number 138, the RFC for adding NPM app ID via an HTTP header. I know we got into this sort of late last week, I think, when we were discussing this first. I'm not sure. I'm not sure if Makita's going to be able to join us today. But I think, Isaac, you were the last one to comment on the RFC itself, and maybe you could add some color to the discussion from last week.
Yeah, let me just quickly load up into working RAM what I was actually commented on. Yeah, so I think that there are some interesting things that kind of need to be hashed out. Like, you know, if we're going to be adding a, I think we discussed last week, if we're going to be adding like a way in a facility in the CLI to set an app name or something, and there should probably be a little bit of some kind of documentation around like what the expectations are for a registry. Like, does the registry just set the app and you're supposed to save it, or do you set the app on the app ID locally and then expect the registry to know about it? Like, what's the actual sort of limits of what this RFC is declaring? The way this, and I think that it's kind of just pending one of us sort of pushing that discussion a little bit further. For the purposes that Makita originally brought up with use within Nexus, it seems like they can probably just get by just fine by having a user, you know, copy and paste the string somewhere. But if we want to do more interesting stuff with it, like, you know, link it to a Git repo or an action, or, you know, specify like some kind of metadata that sort of rides along on this app that's not being published, then it could be interesting. And there's some more kind of more aspects of the surface area that should probably be outlined a bit more. So we could talk more about some of those potential use cases, or
yeah, I know Wes
had take it offline.
Wes had talked about more fluid like object.
Yeah, so I was thinking a bit about this throughout the week, and as it stands, this RFC is, I think, not something that should move forward. But I think that there's a lot of discussions that should happen about what clear objectives we'd want to solve that overlap with this RFC, and then come up with a proposal that actually has like that meat, you know, the meat of whatever that is. Because after last week's conversation, there's a lot of possibilities, but none of them are really laid out in the text of this and even the discussion of this.
Yeah, kind of undersells it.
Yeah, a lot. You know, and maybe it can be done.
I think the result. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Yeah. No, you go ahead.
Oh, I think you're right, and I think that's kind of what I'm getting at. Like, the result may end up being functionally identical to what this RFC proposes. I think that there needs to be a little bit more commentary on it, and like exploration of what it could be used for.
Okay. So it sounds like we should, on this specifically, just give some feedback. It's probably not something we're going to do. Sounds like there's a workaround to help you achieve this today. And if we want to explore something along these lines, then it probably would be best in a net new RFC with all the various use cases that this would essentially, if we support something like this, that this support then would unlock.
Yeah. So the other thing about, like, you know, setting the app ID by an environment variable, like, that seems fine. You know, or a config or whatever. Like, we could do that a number of different ways. We could have the server set it based on a HTTP header that gets sent back. But The main pushback that I had on this RFC specifically was, rather than put it in the package lock.json, it should just be a thing that rides along with every HTTP request you make. So if you specify an app ID, then npm registry fetch will just send that with every request it makes. And then if you wanted, that actually keeps us less tied to the current approach that we use with npm audit. Right now, npm audit sends your entire package lock.json decorated with a little bit of metadata, for like node version and npm version. What I'd like to do, actually, like there's some problems with that approach actually for doing npm audit. It's really costly on the server to parse that thing out and then build up the entire tree and figure out what all the resolutions or what all the remediations need to be. And it's not that hard to do on the client side, and then we end up having to do half of it on the client side anyway. So we are actually looking at maybe doing just a really simple, like extremely terse bulk advisory fetch when we do npm audit on the npm v7, which is an order of magnitude or two faster on the server, so it can be much more reliable. It's more cacheable, and it's less data over the wire. So what that means is, like, for something like this that's saying like, oh well, we should add it to package lock.json, like, well, that actually isn't going to be as future proof as you might think.
Yeah. Cool. So I can essentially take it away or if you want to, Isaac, also give that feedback.
Yeah, I'll do some brain dumping on like how I think it should go. But I think that like having the use case of Nexus wanting to tie audits to an application is like, that's great. We have an external valid use case that we can point to and say like, does this meet it, yes or no? And that's kind of a nice razor for future developments there.
Cool. Moving on. So item number 3, PR 135. So clarify, outline the RFC withdrawal proposal. So essentially, I think we actually merged this the last time. This got merged, I think last week. So essentially, this was a amendment to the README and then sort of the process that we take to ratifying and then potentially withdrawing support for work. So feel free, if somebody wants to change the language in the future, make a pull request. But this will help us essentially. We should take some time, the team probably offline, to update some of the accepted but not implemented RFCs, and then open up some PRs for us to migrate those into that withdrawn folder, with obviously reasons why they don't make sense anymore. So that's a good thing to note. So that's now being merged. I'll take off actually the agenda label. I think that's why that got pulled out. Yeah, so moving on, PR number 133, remove the depth field from npm outdated. And I see somebody's taking notes. Thank you, whoever that is. I don't think Claudia's going to be able to join us today, but maybe, Roy, you can speak to this a bit. You've picked up some of the dedupe. I'm not sure if you've picked up update as well, or if we've already moved ahead with this.
Not really. But I think this was good to go, right? We discussed this last week, I think.
So it should be merged?
Right?
Yeah. I think that was the outcome from last week. We just never got around to doing it.
Yeah, there is an open thing. Wes, I don't know if you wanted to talk to this a little bit. I know that you were bumping into some stuff with npm outdated, just some like weird edges.
Yeah, a bunch. So I actually ripped out the part that calls npm outdated and just re-implemented it. Not to say that means that's what you should do, but that's what I did. So I'm working on some different user experiences there. When I'm ready to, I'll revisit, but I don't think I'm ready to make any proposed changes yet. But unfortunately, there was a couple of reasons why it made more sense for me just to fetch all the pacuments myself and copy and paste the logic out from npm outdated and do it separately. We can discuss those once I have code I can share with y'all.
Sure.
Awesome. So this specifically, can we move forward? I'll merge it. I think it was good.
Yeah.
Yep. And it's mostly implemented. The stuff around update dash dash all is, or sorry, outdated dash dash all is a little bit weird, but I don't know if there's any way around the weirdness. Like showing
scoped config.
No, so if you have okay, so the idea, the thinking behind npm outdated is it should be a list that says if you run npm update, this is what it will do, right? The problem is it can never actually be that, because if you run it is that for the top level, right? It will accurately say like these are the things that are top level dependencies that are out of date. If you run npm update, it will definitely update those things. However, when you look deeper in the tree, you might have an outdated dependency, which itself has an outdated dependency that the new version no longer depends on, right? So if you say npm outdated dash dash all, it's going to show you both of those things, but actually only one of them will actually be removed when you do npm update. Now, I think that's probably fine. Like the actual thing that you probably care about is like, am I using anything that is, you know, maybe no longer supported or whatever? And so we can kind of just like, we can answer that question. But the bigger thing of like, well, what will npm update do? It's like, run it, you know, run it with dry run and see, and that will tell you. And now that we do have, you know, now that we have the dash dash dry run for all the reifying commands, all of the commands that modify the tree, it should be fine to just run npm update dash dash dry run if that's what you want to know.
So for what's worth, this actually tackles a little bit of some of the oddities I was seeing. So when I brought it up in Slack, one of the answers was, yeah, well, npm outdated should tell you everything that would change with npm update. And I was like, oh, that's just not really what I was expecting, right? And what you just said there is actually the better user experience, which is npm outdated is a reporting thing. npm update dash dash dry run is really what you are thinking, right? So the edge case with outdated was if you haven't run npm install, you get, that was the one I brought up in Slack, you get—
It shows everything is missing, yeah.
Exactly, right. And it's like, well, that's useless. I just want to know, like, does my package JSON need to be updated a little bit, right? And so if we changed npm update dash dash dry run to be, this is going to tell you what update would do, versus what npm outdated does, which is, doesn't tell you that it's missing. It just says like, yeah, your package JSON says I want 1.0 and there's a 2.0 available, right? And that would actually resolve the main reason why I moved away from using npm outdated in the tooling I was writing, is just I want to be able to run it on, I want to be able to fetch a package JSON by itself and just say like, tell me what is an update I'd like to apply here, right? So that's the tool that I have right now, is actually just pulling it from the files API and a stash repo.
Right.
I don't even have to clone, right? I just fetch the package JSON and now I'm able to run my version of outdated just by fetching the pacuments, right? And so that's where if we had outdated, the ability to just run it on a fresh clone of a Git repo, you know, it'd be a lot more valuable as a reporting tool than it is today, as long as we have outdated dash dash dry run to tell us the other version, right? Which is what would outdated do? Right.
So I think the change that needs to be made here for npm outdated is it needs to build the ideal tree in such a way that it will, you know, look in your package lock JSON. If that's not present, then it'll look at what's installed. And if that's not present, then it will build up the tree from first principles, right? Based on your dependencies, and then loop over it, seeing, okay, which things are, you know, which things are not like the current latest, and whether that's all or just the top level should be fine.
Okay. Just quick note. So I have merged that now, though, the dash all or depth, remove depth RFC. So that's gone through. That's pretty interesting in terms of that discussion, in terms of outdated and update. I'm sure like a lot of people in the community are probably reasonably misunderstand that inflection or relationship. So I'm not sure if we can solve for that with better docs as we go forward. Yeah, that's a takeaway from, at least I see from that discussion. So, and also excited to see any code you can share, Wes, in the future. Cool, moving on to PR number 18, RFC number 18, NPM audit resolve. So this is one of the, I think one of the oldest outstanding RFCs that we've had in flight for a while. Do we want to, ZB, did you want to maybe give some insight into this? And I know you and Roy had a discussion earlier this week about this. So.
Yep. Okay, so let me introduce the concept first. So the idea is, it all started with me insisting on running NPM audit as a step in CI. So initially, while finding something was still pretty rare, it was okay. We actually started with the predecessor of NPM audit, but let's skip that. So at some point, we noticed that every time we run it, there is a totally irrelevant redos somewhere in our dev dependencies. And that's where it started. So the idea here is to allow developing a culture of caring about dependency security in a team by putting this in CI and flagging stuff, etc., while still being productive. So we need to be able to keep the tooling there, but skip it for 24 hours if it's the last day of the sprint, right? And no one wants to deal with it now. So that's one thing. The second thing is to ignore stuff in general. So we want to ignore things that we're certain will not affect us in any way or that don't have a resolution, and we're fine running with those. And there's a bit more in-depth cases here, which I'm gonna go into that rabbit hole because this is the most important feature here. So the key thing I wanted to propose is that the whole feature of ignoring things is not based just on the advisory ID, but it's ignoring a specific installation of specific package. So imagine I have a package that's my dev dependency, and I obviously want to ignore a denial of service on that. So I do that. But then the same package is a fourth level dependency of something I'm using in production. And if that shows up, I don't want to ignore it. I want to be told about it again. So whenever I install the same vulnerability in a different location, I need to be alerted about it again, even though I already ignored it. So that's one. The other is obviously the same advisory could show up in different packages, or even the usage of the same package can change. So I install another dependency and a vulnerable version gets shifted up by deduplication. So I need to know that this thing that I already ignored is now used by, from a different place in the tree. And that means it changes how it makes my app vulnerable. So with that context, I want to propose two things separately. So this RFC is probably hanging there for such a long time because it's too big, right? So I'm suggesting to first narrow it down to just supporting the file with decisions with npm audit. So if you run npm audit and there is an audit resolve JSON file with some decisions that were made, npm audit would take that into account when deciding if the exit code should be 0 or not. And that's the basic feature here. And then obviously the output is going to change because it's going to say you have this vulnerability that you ignored instead of saying you have this vulnerability overall, right? So this is the basic functionality. And since the last update of this RFC, I've worked a bit on the tool I'm building. It has some real world usage, and I refactored it to a point where it's 2 packages now. And there's a core package that consists mostly of all the code that's necessary for reading, validating, and updating the audit resolve file. And I still intend to add a bit to the API of that package. But overall, it's intended to be something that you embed in npm or other package managers, and something that you use to build other tools for editing the audit resolve file on top of that. So it has the JSON schema for validation. It has some tooling for migrating between versions of the schema, because I already made some breaking decisions initially, even before the RFC. So that's already there, and I just want to improve the API a little bit. Yeah, that's the overview of what's still valid from the RFC.
Yeah, that's awesome. I have to commend and applaud. This has been open for a long time, and you going out and actually creating the tooling, showing the use case, and showing that there is folks that would be using this like in the wild is incredible. So it validates the assumption that this is something that we want and need. And I think anecdotally, I think we all see a use for this. Breaking down the RFC, I think makes a lot of sense to just to the straight up resolutions or audit resolve file.
So there was you said there was 2 proposals. The first is this like core package, which lets you like modify or
yeah. So the RFC contains both at this point, because I suggested taking the whole tool I developed and putting it inside npm, which got a bit of pushback because the whole point of the tool for editing the resolutions file is that it's interactive, and npm doesn't really like being interactive.
So the second part is the like interactive editing of the decisions.
Yeah, and it's actually taking the audit and grouping it and iterating over it, asking you questions where you're responding by pressing a single button on the keyboard and making the decisions quickly if they're obvious to you, and it can ask follow-up questions. So this is developed, and I would like to suggest keeping it separate for now, and working out a different, maybe just a simpler pattern for helping people in editing the file, because overall the schema of the file is designed in a way that it should be human readable and human editable. With the only fix I need to make is the format where it uses timestamps, and I believe it should support wider range of notations for date and time. But other than that, it's fairly doable for a human to maintain this file even manually. And I believe the next step would be for npm to have a resolve command that would produce a template for the file where everything coming from npm audit that's not fixed. So you run the resolve and it fixes everything, marks it as fixed, and everything that wasn't fixed is marked as the decision is none, and then you can go in and edit the decision before committing the file. With the added benefit of this file being pretty printed, so every commit in the history of this file is assigning a decision to a particular person on the team. It's easier to track it then.
Cool. Thoughts from folks on the call?
Yeah, so I think this is really interesting, and I'm surprised I haven't actually seen this RFC yet. I must have just looked over it in the list, because I think this would be another very interesting topic to talk about with the package maintenance working group, and see if there's any ways. So, for example, if you have a specification for a resolve file, you know, we're working on this package support specification. It seems like that would be something we would maybe want to get involved with and help give feedback around and help promote once, you know, it's stabilized a bit, especially if it looks like NPM has some interest in, you know, taking up implementing it inside of NPM, because these kind of things are going to be, you know, widely impactful. And if package maintainers have the ability to, you know, work with their communities and, you know, get them on board with like, oh yeah, we have a new, you know, CVE came out for this package, but it's most likely not going to affect you. Go here to the official documentation on, you know, the audit resolve format, so that you can add in a specific ignore, and we would then be able to start really promoting, you know, that to the community. I'd be interested at least in you know, reading through, you know, a detailed specification for what it, you know, what it looks like to write this file, you know, and like I said, the package maintenance working group seems like a good place to have a discussion around that if you're interested in, you know, broadening the conversation and getting feedback from, you know, a wider array of community members. So slightly unrelated to, you know, on the RFC call, but this sounds really interesting to me.
Yeah, I have a similar idea. One thing that comes to mind here is the you know, we've sort of long punted on this idea of like, you know, I'm using like handlebars and it has a redos. If, you know, or the McDerp minimist thing is like a great example, right? Like if you're passing user data to your command line McDerp, then it can break McDerp. Like nobody cares if you're passing user data to the command line McDerp, then you're already owned, right? And so what would be nice is a way for me as the McDerp maintainer to sort of add an advisory thing that says, yes, there's this audit warning, but you probably don't have to worry about it. And here's why. And then when we're doing those resolutions, we could actually look at those stored upstream decisions and say like, you know, hey, do you want to, you probably would want to like revisit it and take a minute and say, okay, do I actually trust this person, or are they just annoyed at getting bug reports? There have been some cases, particularly with we've run into a bunch with the dependencies of NYC and TAP, where like it's not a problem. It's only a problem if you're running it in a server. You're probably not loading a test framework in your production server anyway. Like it's not a big deal. But we have to go and bump versions on like 100 different things because of these. So being able to just sort of mark them as, you know, in that kind of, and serve it in that kind of format to say like, here's the audit decisions that were made by the maintainer of this package about this particular dependency, and suggest that to you when you're making this decision.
I think to expand on that slightly, I think there one simple thing that could, or low barrier to entry thing that could be implemented with that is like letting maintainers mark, is this a production audit concern, or is this like a dev dependency concern? And if it's production, it filters out. If it's installing via, like, audit filters it on like the alert if it's installing via dev deps. But sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, we've definitely looked at that. There have been a fair number of of issues that we've encountered on the registry, I mean, most of them were actual malware, right? So we end up pulling it from the registry anyway. But being able to own a dev machine is actually really valuable. It's arguably more valuable than owning a production machine, because then you get to own all of them. So I definitely would hesitate to say like vulnerability, to ever like filter out and not show vulnerabilities in dev dependencies, but
if you for owning a dev machine, we've already messed up, because audit happens after everything's installed and everything's already run. Like we can't say that's going to
tell you that it could tell you that you have a vulnerability. Like, yes, if you install malware, yes, that is a problem. But if you install something that opens up a backdoor on your dev machine, or in some
Isaac, the problem here, as you mentioned with MakeDerp, is that the existence of a CVE in almost no way guarantees that you have a vulnerability.
Right.
It means that a security researcher got some money. That's all it means. Like, so I totally agree with you. Like, I don't want, like right now, because of NPX, actually, all of my repos are only checking audit against production deps. Because I had to block all the dev ones because my audit checking tool uses libnpx, and npx currently has a CVE on it, right? It's a bullshit CVE. It doesn't apply to npx, so I don't care about it, but I have to turn off all my dev deps because I can't ignore that one warning, right? And so I'm saying that the complete shitstorm that is the entire security ecosystem is the reason why we need to be able to target specific things, both as an end user, but also as a package author. And like, I think there has to be a decision between like, do we want to undermine the entire confidence in end users of the CVE system, or do we want to risk letting package authors like be slightly more malicious and hide real CVEs?
Isaac, feel free to respond to that, and then ZB after.
Yeah. So I mean, to Jordan and Tierney's suggestion, like as an end user, you can run npm audit -- production, and it will only show you production deps. The thing that we've sort of hesitated to do is mark a vulnerability as only affecting production deps and ignore it if it is found in a dev dep. And I think there is absolutely a balancing act. Jordan, your background is extremely appropriate while we're discussing this subject. It's you know, it's difficult, and there's just not just like conflicting motivations, but perversely conflicting motivations in a lot of cases.
Just quickly be mindful of time. I also see Tierney's got his hand up as well. ZB, feel free to chime in, and then I'm gonna probably time box this for another 3 minutes.
Okay, so I wanted to say I'm not sure if the entirety of the conversation is something we would want to do around the audit resolutions, because for the package maintainer to be able to sort of defend their package, important air quotes, it's more of a thing that we should add to the audit itself. So the audit data that's being checked should pull in some information from the package maintainer, which you could put in package JSON famously with all other unexpected stuff, or even edit it through, I don't know, NPM's website. But this is something that they would put in, and this, regardless of how they put it in, it belongs to the audit, not as part of what their package would have in their ignores, because their ignores are necessary for their build process. And reusing that same thing to be a message to other people would be like reusing package lock when installing stuff in your own repository, which, as far as I know, we're not doing, right? So this would make the same file serve two purposes, and I'm not sure I feel comfortable having that happen in my apps. But I would appreciate the maintainer being able to defend themselves and say, hey, this is a CLI tool, so if it has a redos you shouldn't care. And it would be helpful to display that when reviewing audits in more detail.
Yeah, that's basically what I was suggesting. We could use the same data format to communicate this sort of a suggested resolution.
Tierney, did you have anything you want to add?
Yeah, I just wanted to say, and I think this might have been counter to what ZB said, but I get nervous of adding more and more file formats. And like, if we do end up adding an additional format, I would prefer it if it would be something more broadly generic. So like audit.json, or adding this to package.json, or having the option to parse it from package.json instead of audit.json. But I do get nervous by like, okay, so we have this feature that's cool that adds a file, but then there's another one that we add a specific one, and it just ends up being we have 500 different files for 500 different features, and that gets really heavy in a repo, especially for like something that's small. So
yeah, we've
I actually agree with that.
you do?
Oh, go ahead.
Okay.
I also agree, but this is why I think this needs a bigger conversation, because there's a bunch of related things like this that if we just solve for audit, we're not really solving for the other ones that are the exact same needs. So I mentioned in the chat, Express locks external dependencies. So we don't ever want a external, and we say external meaning something not managed by the Express team. We don't, anything that's not managed by the Express team, we want never to have a caret or a tilde or any Semver range specifier, right? But we have no way to signal that intent. It's just whether it has it or not. So all of the automated dependency update tools just don't work for us, because they're always going to be like complaining and opening PRs that we don't want, right? So like there's a bigger conversation about what is my intent by specifying this version, right? And audit, it's the exact same thing. I'm saying I'm specifying this version, and my intent is to also, by doing that, ignore CVEs related to that version, right? Like there's a general intent that we're missing by just having a single Semver range specifier. That means that all of these automated tools in the ecosystem aren't able to do their full job. This is why I think moving this conversation to something like the package maintenance working group, spending 6 months fleshing out what intents do package maintainers have that are not represented today, and how could we come up with a way to help do that, and then build experimental tooling around that, that we would then look at later coming back into NPM proper. And maybe the start is your NPM audit resolve, right? And then we could get a group of people around building out this experimental tooling, but at a broader scale, right? Not just thinking about, oh, we know we have audit resolve. Like I can tell you, Express would be very interested if we could have a way to signal to automated dependency update tools. No, ignore that when you're looking at what to update. And then we would use that, right? So that would be a way to really up-level this conversation and flesh it out before NPM makes any decision on, how do we solve this one very specific problem, which is audit complaining too much.
So just two things there. One, we're sort of past the time boxed here already. And I know that there's going to be updates to this RFC in and of itself. It's going to be separated into two, I think, ZB. You're going to go back and hopefully do that. Second, I would encourage you, as Wes has said, to come join us at the package maintenance working group. So that's inside the Node project. You can find, I think it's node.js / package maintenance, package dash maintenance.
I'll get a link. One second.
Yeah, that'd be great. And to bring that discussion there, as there's been other discussions about supports and that. Tangentially, the next item on the agenda actually is overrides. So funny enough,
Yes.
I feel like this is very, similar in terms of how the approach, and there's, I think, a little bit of overlap in these discussions. Isaac, would you like to speak to that? The RFC itself is 129.
Yeah, so I did actually just update this at long last from our prior discussions several meetings ago. So essentially the this most recent kind of rev on this RFC simplifies the way that we do nested override object rule sets, as well as string overrides. So essentially, the first rule to match is always the last one to match, right? We don't keep looking after we hit one that creates an override on that particular edge. From there, the way that you can do, both override a particular resolution as well as provide a rule set for its child dependencies, you would use the dot key to apply to the package or the resolution step currently being considered. I suspect that there may be one kind of pathological case here. If you have metadepths that are being overridden in some rather weird ways, I think there may be cases where you can get into a sort of an infinite loop of duplication within your node modules folder. But I haven't been able to solve for that just yet. Yeah, but otherwise, I think most of the bike shedding is done. The one issue that does need to be sussed out, and I'm not sure how to do it without having running code, is whether or not overrides apply to shrink wrap and bundle dependencies, or shrink wrap or bundle dependencies, I guess. The contract that NPM provides with bundle dependencies is that whatever you bundle and list as a bundle dependency, that is, I guarantee it, that is what will be installed. It'll be installed at that path. You can do required /node modules /foo and be, it doesn't even have to be the same foo that exists on the registry. It will be left alone. Jordan has found the specific limits of of that contract. It doesn't actually apply to the root project, but whatever, basically when you pack your package, whatever is a bundle dependency will be included as is in the package artifact. And then when it's installed as a dependency, everything that's bundled will be left alone and respected. So should an override apply? It's certainly going to be easier to say no.
Personal feelings is no. Personal thoughts and feelings is no.
Right, but on the other hand, like if I want to override the version of NYC that's installed with tap and it's a bundle dependency, like I should be able to, I feel like I should be able to do that. And it depends on which side you're sitting of the installer consumer divide, whether or not you want to do that.
You're saying like who has ownership, and if you're further downstream, you should have more ownership over.
Kind of, but also it's about who has more understanding of what's going on and what's right for your app. Like if I'm bundling something, it's probably for a good reason. And it might not even be the thing that's on the registry. It may be my own custom fork of it or something. So I might be floating a patch to fix something. The other concern is so that's bundle dependencies. Shrink wraps are kind of another thing where we have a similar contract that says whatever you lock in your npm shrink wrap.json file, that is the tree that will be resolved from that point in the package dependency graph. So can I override that? Now that's a lot easier to do than bundle dependencies, but it is still easier to just say it's in a shrink wrap, we're going to leave it alone. Because essentially the way that we do this in Arborist today is we do a load virtual on that particular tree and then just root it in the thing that has the shrink wrap and say, all right, that's the tree. I don't even have to look any further or do any kind of resolution. So if we can do overrides on shrink wrap depths, now we need to, or bundle depths, we now have to walk that sort of that tree that we unpacked and apply any of those resolutions and then essentially do a whole ideal tree build on it. So my strong suspicion is we're going to say this is just too hard and say overrides don't apply to shrink wrap and bundle dependencies. It's kind of rare use case anyway, although it's one that takes up a lot of our time and energy, unfortunately.
Yeah. So, yeah, quick question on that, and just to be mindful of time, because I know Orta's here again, and I apologize. We keep leaving the types discussion seems to always end towards the end here. But in terms of the questions that you're sort of formalizing about overrides and those edges, like, could we just put those down in a issue or a thread and kind of do that async or flush those out async?
Yeah, so
you're saying, like, what happens with bundled? Did you put that in the RFC itself? Sorry.
I did update the RFC PR, like, as this meeting was started. So I don't expect anybody to seen it yet. But and there's just that one last open question under the like open questions and bike shedding section. Everything else I've just taken the decision that we discussed last time and sort of embedded it in the RFC itself. It also really ought to have at least a sketch of an implementation, but it's, we might just wait until we have running code and describe what that is.
So ideally, we can get some feedback in time for the next meeting, maybe on that specifically. It'd be good, like, going forward, if we have questions like that, if we can open up polls or something, if you know the outcome as well. Like, if there's a question with like immediate like multiple choice answers or outcomes, maybe we can just like see what the community, try to source feedback en masse.
And just to be clear, like, if 99% of users all say yes, it should apply to bundle depths and shrink wraps, but it's really, really hard, or there's some horrible edge case that we can see, like, we might still not do it. But if there's sort of overwhelming support for it, at least that'll give us some kind of direction about like how hard we should look. Yeah.
The only thing like my mind goes to or the only reason I bring that up is just because like asking those questions in the RFC itself isn't as actionable. Like, the commentary usually ends up being this group or a smaller subset of the community, whereas like we could potentially market something easier that's super actionable, like a poll or something like that in an issue thread, which we have support for with Probot polls. So might be an option, right?
Let's do it.
Cool. Yeah, Orta, I apologize. This has happened 3 times over, and I feel like I owe you an ice cream. Given how hot things are getting out. Can you give us a quick update on PR 126 and the types information?
Sure. So I added feedback from a few RFCs ago, but I think I came to the conclusion today about where the state currently is. Basically, this group kind of has to make a decision across one of 2 different paths, basically. If you've not, I'll just summarize the RFC anyway beforehand. The idea is we want to get information about whether a package has types in it. That could be either flow types or TypeScript types in a format where it can be easily accessible. And my first proposal was that this goes into a underscore types field in the document. So most of the time it just automatically looks to see whether there's any DTS files or flow files inside the tarball, and then just adds it as part of the registry metadata automatically. And then the sort of the opposing idea, so we have to kind of decide between these 2 ideas, is instead we use npm publish to sort of push people in the direction of using the fields that are already supported by TypeScript and could be supported flow. So basically, the RFC's a point where we ever need to just where we make users put this information in on all, or is it something where we say this is automated and is added by the npm CLI during sort of package phase? And that's kind of the decision that is where it's still a question mark.
Okay,
you already have, go ahead.
I can help you with this. Yes, my decision is yes. We should put this metadata in package.json. And I'm stating this very definitively, but if there's pushback, I don't actually feel that definitive about it. We should put it in package.json. That should be the sort of authoritative place where it lives. When we do the manifest, when we read the package.json from a manifest, if it does not have a types field, but there is a index.dts, then we should guess at what the types field should be if it's possible to do it automatically. We can do that client side, and we can also override it based on whatever, if there's something specifically in there. We do this already for a handful of fields. We default like the I forget now. We default like the git head and the bugs field and a bunch of other, based on what's in the folder. So I would say, let's make the spec be like, what do you put in package JSON if you have types? And then the next step is we'll update the read package JSON package to sort of automatically shove that into the manifest that gets published. That's definitely the path of least resistance. It's already 100% supported by the registry. It's I guess maybe not quite 100%. We probably also want to add it to the Corgi, the minified package documents. But again, that's something really trivial and easy. The hard part is deciding what the data is.
Does that help? Are we resolved on that?
Are you unblocked?
Yeah, not blocked. In theory, I bet I probably have to make a small amendment to the RFC just to sort of make it more definitive. Right now, it's like, here's the questions, here's what we could do. But basically from that, if you give it a read over and that seems good, I'm happy to make the PM, at least to the CLI, because I don't know everything else.
Sounds good. Was there anything else? I know we're essentially at time. Sounds like you have an action there in order to clean up and move forward with one path forward. So anything else from anybody? Not?
I think maybe
Roy,
I know next week we're supposed to do a deep dive, but maybe we should just do similar as last week and have a regular Open RFC call instead.
Yeah, I know we didn't get to the last 3 or 4, and there's a couple of discussions that have come up. So we may decide to just keep doing these weekly, and then do out of band deep dives. I think maybe that would make more sense. So with that in mind, hopefully I'll see all of you folks next week then. Go ahead, Isaac.
I don't think we'll be there by next week, but just calling out that the discussion on discussion kind of around audit and not just audit resolve, but also the data set for how you express whether or not something is a valid vulnerability in a particular use case, and what do we do with that data? Where does it come from? How do maintainers make their automated tooling a little smarter? That feels like it's very deep dive worthy. I don't think we're going to be, like I said, I don't think we're going to be there next week, but I suspect that may be our next big juicy target to go for once package maintainers working group sort of tosses it around a little bit.
Yeah, for sure. I think that will definitely be on the agenda for the next call there with that working group. So awesome. Well, thank you everyone for jumping on again, and hopefully we'll see you in the RFC's repo, but also next week on this call. So I'll see you next week.
All right.
Ciao.
Bye.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye.